I want to take some of the ideas that are core to this holiday and translate them a little bit, because I think we're all under pressure from other people to explain what's happening. And I don't want to say on the side of Israel. I want to say on the side of truth. In fact, at the preparation for Passover on Tuesday night, which actually was a lot of fun, I should have scheduled more time. One person shared that somebody said to them, "What's Israel doing in Gaza anyway?" And the answer is fighting a war. Now, once you rest into the idea that there's a war on, then everything else follows from that. So I want all of us to understand that there is a war in response to an unprovoked, savage attack. If you have 1 minute to talk to people, this is your minute. The next thing they will say is civilian casualties. Now, we're going to put in the chat a link to a YouTube video that demonstrates that the so-called Gaza casualty figures, or sometimes presented as Palestinian casualty figures, are Hamas casualty figures. And hoping that the YouTube arrives, a statistician has looked that there's an even climb from October 7th that is statistically impossible. 350 people a day to get to 100 days and 35,000 people. Now, we read in the newspaper, 5 were killed here, 18 killed here, 26 killed there. And I'm not saying that's not true. I doubt it, but it might be true. But notice, it doesn't add up to 350 casualties a day, every single day, day in, day out, from October 7th until now. So my question for anybody who says casualty figures, meaning Palestinian casualty figures, meaning Gaza casualty figures, which means Hamas casualty figures, why isn't the press covering 350 people killed day in and day out? Because there's no evidence for it. I'm not saying there haven't been casualties, but it would be so interesting for the media to actually verify the numbers. So when someone pushes back and says casualty figures, say, "May I have a minute of your time?" It's a neat graph, goes in one direction with no blips, 350 people a day with no verification by the media. Now, it gives me pause. Oh, and by the way, they also add mostly women and children. No verification, no substantiation, but I see it repeated over and over and over again. And I have to tell you, I'm not really scared. I'll tell you why. I'm actually disgusted. I'm disgusted with our media. I'm disgusted with our news sources that a basic element of a democracy is a free press that not only is free to publish any opinion they want, but ideally to verify anything they present as a fact. And I think our press, and I see it almost everywhere, I don't have any paper subscriptions, but the news outlets, New York Times, I could list on and on again. They present Hamas figures as facts, although they haven't substantiated anything. So I want you, hold on a second. Okay, Mike, okay, thank you. You can just type in your browser, Hamas casualty figures, a scam, a hoax. The links will come right up. You need to share this as much as you can widely. I don't want you to lose all your friends. By the way, when I began advocating for Israel after October 7th, I had 5,000 friends. Within a few weeks, I had 4,000 friends on Facebook. So I realized a lot of people didn't like it. That's okay. I had 4,000 who did like it. That was, or didn't object at least. So that's something you have to put out there. It's a war. The casualty figures are a hoax. That doesn't mean to say there aren't casualty figures. The next thing you have to memorize to say is Hamas weaponizes its civilians. Everybody knows about the extensive tunnel system. There were no bomb shelters. Now imagine that. Massive tunnel system, no bomb shelters. Hamas did not build bomb shelters because they're looking for the propaganda against Israel that Israel massacres innocent civilians. They weren't innocent civilians. They were murdered by Hamas. Putting your civilians in the way of war is a war crime. I'll post those links another time. Putting armaments in mosques is a war crime. Putting armaments in schools is a war crime. So Hamas has committed one war crime after another, according to the UN definition of war crimes, but you'll never see that in the newspaper. So we are, unfortunately, our nation is at the mercy of a press that is either malicious or profoundly ignorant, and the ignorant, in my mind, amounts to malice. So that's the bad news. Now, what's interesting for me, when people say most people don't think Netanyahu is doing a good job, they poll Americans who know nothing about Israel or Netanyahu, they just heard some stuff. There should be a ceasefire. These are people that know absolutely nothing. No one asks the question, should every Israeli be massacred? Should every Israeli be murdered? They don't ask that question because they'll get a no, a resounding no. But that's what Hamas is advocating. That's what's being advocated on the college campuses. So in every discussion that you have with anybody, you have to have a few things memorized. Israel's at war because of an unprovoked, savage attack to defeat Hamas and rescue the abductees, the hostages. That's simple. In this war, Hamas reports casualty figures, which are a hoax. We actually don't know how many Gazans have been killed, and they don't make a distinction between their terrorist fighters and civilians. We just don't know. But we do know the numbers are a hoax because they're statistically impossible. The next thing is, why are there casualty figures? Because Hamas is weaponizing their civilians. Now, you don't have to trust me. You can look all this up. But you have to have your response to people memorized, and you have to get it out calmly, confidently, within about 2 minutes, and let the other person have the floor. What they inevitably say next is, well, don't you think Israel could have fought the war better? Don't you think humanitarian supplies have gotten there earlier? My response is, undoubtedly. And I'd like you to point out to me, which war was fought well? Which war was fought well? And what you'll find is, they don't know anything about warfare. They don't know anything about any other war, because if they did, they could never point to a war that was fought well in terms of unnecessary casualties, in terms of humanitarian aid not getting there in time. Now, I happen to believe that the Israeli military and government is a profoundly humane and moral government and are doing what they can, seeing that they're at war with an intractable enemy, Nazi-like in its ideology, with the support of their civilians. Gazans support the war, as do the Palestinians on the West Bank. Israel's in a tough spot. Now, here's the good news. I shared this with somebody, and they said to me, Rabbi Finley, have you noticed that in the primaries, 46 out of 46 Democratic candidates, AIPAC-approved demonstrated Democratic candidates, have won their primaries? Well, that's good news. And if one looks just a bird's eye view, the aid package to Israel was approved overwhelmingly in our Congress. That's good news. I think the university presidents are on notice that calling for genocide actually is against rules of student harassment. 2 university professors had to resign from that. Why aren't they saying anything? It's my next question I ask myself. Why aren't the university presidents coming out? And I want to share with you, I think, the trap that they're in, and then I'll try to move to a Passover theme. The professional agitators have gamed this very well, because here's what they do. Jonah Goldberg, putting the professional agitators aside, that I think are actually evil people, The students, though, are what Jonah Goldberg calls radical brats. If you don't know who Jonah Goldberg is, please look up his website. He's one of the only people that I roundly trust. I get his column every week. I pay for it. It's always great, entertaining, and inspiring for me, Jonah Goldberg. He calls them radical brats. Why brats? Because they know how to push things right to the limit where they don't physically threaten anybody, but they're so inappropriate that the only way to bring them in line is actual physical pressure, meaning from the police. So it's an invitation for someone else to put their hands on them. So, for example, when Professor Chemerinsky had his house somewhat invaded by protesters, he was having a private dinner. They came in, set up a mic, set up a speaker, started talking on the mic. How do you get a mic out of someone's hand? Now, to do it, you got to put your hands on their hands. You can't, especially if it's a wireless mic, you can't cut the cord. If it's battery powered, you can't cut the electric. What do you do? In my imagination, Professor Chemerinsky, his wife, and all the gathered students looked at this and they said to themselves, we don't know what to do. It's a radical brat. They're taking advantage of the civility of others and daring anybody to try to wrestle the mic out of her hand, which the professor's wife tried to do, and then, of course, photo op and accusation of battery by Chemerinsky's wife against the Palestinian agitator. This is happening on the campuses. Now, they're in violation of campus rules, they're in violation of court orders, but the next step is to have them removed. They're inviting a police response so that that can be the headlines. When people say, why don't they just remove them? That's playing right into their game. The reason they don't remove them is that's the photo op that they want. Now, I don't know what to do. This reminds me of, you may remember this, the Occupy movement, when they would just occupy swaths of private land. And there was huge restraint by city officials not to have people arrested and removed for flagrantly violating the law, because they realized they were trying to bait the police into a response. All you need is for one person to fight back, then you have your photo op. A person hustled up, put into a van, and as it were, they win. So this is as it were, a struggle being played out in the press to gain sympathy as they bait officials, including police, campus security, into a physical confrontation. They're not being physical, though they're inviting physicality because they're breaking the law. Now, I actually don't know what to do. I don't know what I would recommend other than the good news that I'm seeing. There's a call for a massive protest at Columbia by Jews, I believe this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. So again, you know, we're not as well organized as the enemy, because what we're seeing today, this has been in the works, in my opinion, for years. Those tents didn't come out of nowhere. This organization didn't come out of nowhere. This is like the tunnels in Gaza. There's been an underground movement preparing, in my mind, for this day for quite some time, and the operational plan just went in at this moment. Now, unfortunately, our Jewish leadership is not organized in that way. We're not a military hierarchy. So it takes a democracy, you know, and I'll say something about cacophony of Jewish leadership. It actually takes them a few weeks to get on the same message and figure out what to do. I mean, the good of that is our Jewish communities are not run in a tyrannical, hierarchical fashion. On the other hand, it actually takes a few weeks for there to be a response. A response does be forming by Jewish professors and their advocates. Hopefully, students will find some courage and speak up for their other Jewish students. There's been an astonishing, in my mind, disgusting lack of backbone among students. And the main reason is, and I'll go back to my beginning talks on what happened after October 7th. I was trying to explain how this DEI could take hold. Remember, DEI is not about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's critical neo-Marxist theory gone very bad, and trying to remake American education based on the perspective of those people who believe in, again, critical theory and neo-Marxism gone bad. Now, why do people fall for it? Because they don't have an alternative belief system. They don't have anything in them where they believe so deeply that they can respond. Now, I don't want to put this in terms of God, because if one says, if you don't, I happen to believe this, but I don't think you can say it and get anywhere. If one says, if you care anything at your core except from God, it's idolatry. I like the statement, it does not work in a discussion. I want us to remember, if you're going to have this discussion, what is the core thing that our nation stands for, that every student stands for, even though they probably never discussed it and never understood it, is called human rights. I don't recommend mentioning God, but you can say, at our core, we are a country of human rights. Broad agreement, unless a person is off the edges. People say yes. We have a right to free speech. Yes, but it's a limited right. Everybody knows shouting fire in a crowded theater. Yes, it's a limited right. We have the freedom of assembly. It's a limited right. If you're with a discussion partner, say we are a country of rights, enshrined in the Bill of Rights. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to freedom of assembly. But they are all limited rights, especially when they come up the edge of the liberty of another person. Memorize that. My right to assemble stops at the liberty of another person. So I can demonstrate in the street, but I ought not take over the sidewalks, because then other people can't go their way. Now, if they set up in the campus quad, but they interfere with students going about their way, then they are infringing on the rights of others to what is called go about their way, to go from one place to another unmolested. And so every time you talk about the right to speak, the right to assemble, it ought not morally impinge upon the liberty of other people, which is happening today, especially the freedom from harassment, the freedom from intimidation, and I think in colleges, the freedom from vilification, which is what's happening. So what ought we do? In my opinion, our counter message has to be, they're exercising their right to free speech and freedom of assembly, but they're not respecting the liberty and rights of others. So they're being unethical. They're being immoral for the sake of their cause. People say, well, some causes require that. My response is, that's going to end in a bad place. Whenever a group says, our cause is so important that we don't have to respect the liberty and rights of others, that is always going to end very badly. And ask them, is that a rule you want to live by? So think about the people you hate the most. Would you want them to adopt that rule? Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. That's Hillel. Would you want them to adopt the rule that their rights are so great that they can impinge on the rights and liberties of others? You want that a rule for all humankind? This is Kant. No. So how about if we all have freedom to assemble, freedom of speech, as long as it does not impinge upon the liberty and rights of others? So going back to my constant comments after October 7th and the DEI, which primed the ground in our campuses for this leftist takeover that's been in preparation for decades, but we're finally pushing back. DEI is getting kicked off of campuses because remember, it's not about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's about radical politics becoming a pseudo-religion and taking over the minds of our young people, and I'm not exaggerating. How do we protect them? They have to believe strongly in something else. We have to remind them what they do believe in already, which is rights, civil rights, human rights, including the right to liberty, not to be harassed when you're going about your way. In campuses, the right not to be harassed and vilified. I think people say, yeah, those are rights as well. And you can ask the person who's critical, say, well, then what ought we do when people are demonstrating and speaking violate the rights of others? What should we do? Now, if you can introduce a question into the mind of your discussion partner, you've done a great thing. You can probably end the discussion right there. With the radicals, you can't get anywhere. It's just going to turn into a shouting match, which I don't recommend. You won't get anywhere. They belong to a quasi-religion that does not respect human rights. It's about something else. And I don't want to go back into all my discussions then. If you want to, go to my YouTube talks after October 7th. It's a different religion. It's a different value system. It's not our value system, our common value system that is rooted in rights, human rights, civil rights, and natural rights. Now, my segue for Passover is this. Again, I fear to overstate this, but as I talk to one young person after another, they've really been taken over by an intellectual darkness. When they take on this neo-Marxian, that your essence as a human being is not that you are equal in the eyes of the law and God as any other person, but that your moral stature is decided by your class and your race. Look how contrary this runs to Martin Luther King. You're judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. That is our value system. So they've reintroduced a value system that says your value as a human being is what we say it is. And these artificial notions that are, by the way, culturally pretty specific, because you can't export this to almost any other country, which tells you it's not the human condition, it's a political ruse. So, but there's not been any pushback until now. So as I talk to one young person after another, it makes me very sad to see that they're put into this kind of a haze. They're somewhat mesmerized by this language that creates a kind of an intellectual and moral darkness within them, or to put it in a Passover theme, a kind of a slavery. They are not able to think freely, because if they try, they'll be put down and harassed by other students who are very vocal and very intimidating and harass. I've seen numerous YouTube videos where one student in the classroom tried to say something and they launched at that person like piranhas. A professor tries to say something. You saw this at Evergreen College a couple of years ago, and how insufferable the environment came to be. Now, what do you call this? When you hear something said in the classroom and you object, but you're afraid. You're afraid to be intimidated, harassed, excluded, and maybe even for your physical safety. We're going to call this a kind of an Egypt. Meaning there's kind of a tyrannical darkness that has taken over, in my mind, many of our educational institutions, but also news outlets and cultural institutions. Many people have complained to me that a women's center in a given city was taken over by Palestinian activists and basically ran the Jews out of the center because they said they supported Israel. Now, what that has to do with women's reproductive rights, right? It's not about women's reproductive rights. It's about running the Zionists out. So there's an Egypt today. Now, the way out of Egypt is out of Egypt toward truth. And what is truth? Back to the core human ideas of equality and rights and eventually natural law. Now, I want to keep it very simple. You are arguing for truth, the truth of human equality. The content of your character is not based on anything extrinsic to the content of your character. We believe in human rights across the board. The right to speak and the right to go about your way. The right to demonstrate and the liberty to go about your way without vilification, harassment, and insult. Keep your messaging simple. I know that all of you believe this, maybe more than you believe in God. More than you believe in Torah, you believe this. We have to center ourselves in what we truly, deeply believe and share with other people your core belief system, which makes October 7th an atrocity. When they say there'll be 1,000 more, that's atrocious. They should be condemned. They should be shouted down. Why do students accept it? Because they don't have a value system to replace it. They see a demonstration, they go down and look around. The next thing they're shouting, Gaza free from the river to the sea. They have no idea what they're talking about. Why do they say it? Because no one's taught them anything else. So our job, as I was saying after October 7th, for the next 30 years, for the rest of my life, and I hope I have the years, is to inculcate in our young people and all young people in this country a value system that can resist this darkness, this slavery, this intellectual darkness and slavery that has taken over our educational systems, infiltrating society. Now, I'm glad to say there's a lot of pushback. But the pushback is going to oftentimes be people just like you and me, one discussion after another to spread this word. So this is a time of exiting from Egypt right now for our people and our country and for Israel. We all have to take a stand. This really is a time to take a stand everywhere as much as you can. And hopefully we can, all good people, what did I have to write on the typewriter in typing class? Now is the time for all good people to come to aid of their country. When I was learning how to type, I probably typed that 100 times. Well, now is the time. Now is the time for all good people to come to aid of their country. That includes you, includes me.